especially with something like this. This is a trumpet. If you don't know what this is, then you shouldn't be watching this video. It is a directional instrument, meaning that the sound comes out towards the direction that the bell is facing, meaning that it sounds softer when I play away from you, but louder when I play towards you. Now this is important for one main reason, and that is a trumpet player habit, especially newer ones that don't have necessarily endurance in the arms, to play into the stand. Now this sounds good from your perspective, but from the conductor and from everyone else's, they can't hear you. So they will play, so it will sound muffled or not even at all. And that is probably the worst thing that you can do, especially in the case of that. Now the best way to get sound, as far as if you do everything right, is if you notice when I set up with my back almost perfectly straight, and you can't really see it. Well, now you can. But I sit with my back away from the back of the chair. This is mainly to keep it so you don't do something like this or something like this where you're slouching down. And you don't want to play slouching down because that compresses your lungs, where your air cavity, where your lungs actually are, because your lungs aren't actually up in the chest. They go all the way down to the base of your stomach. And people that play down like this, hunched over, are only using the top part of their lungs, so they don't have as much air to go with, or as much time to play, because they will run out of air, and they will run out of air faster, and it won't sound as good. It'll sound squeezed, it'll sound sharp. And that's what happens with instruments. Brief tangent, a trumpet, this is a trumpet's main tuning slide. Shortening it makes the instrument sharp, lengthening it makes the instrument flat. And that is how you control the instrument. Trumpets are notoriously hard to tune because the player plays more than the instrument itself. And because of that, they have more control over the tune than the instrument itself, meaning that if you set up your embouchure wrong, you squeeze your throat, you compress your body, everything can make it sharp or flat, and it's not easy, it's not always consistent to keep it strained. And this can be true for a lot of brass instruments. It's not the same with woodwinds, I believe, because unless reeds don't really change, but it could. I don't know off the top of my head because I don't play woodwind instruments. And yeah. Another thing is to breathe in as much air as you can. And the main way where to push is push with your stomach. You don't want to exert extra into pressing with your arms, constricting every cell, every muscle in your body, when you only need your chest and your stomach to actually push air, and occasionally your throat. You shouldn't really use your throat unless you really need to get up high, and as you get better, you want to stop using your throat and start pushing faster air. See, the way that I did that was a little bit with my throat as well as with my embouchure, but the best way to do that is just to push faster air. The best way to learn how to to do jumps like that is really just to play and to try to change it without changing your fingers. You can play on almost any instrument. You can play at least one other note with one fingering. I don't know, especially with woodwinds. I mean, that's not necessary because woodwinds, they're omnidirectional instruments, so they don't really have the same code as a brass instrument with a bell. Because the saxophone example, how it controls this tune is holes all along the side of the tube, and so it's omnidirectional. It doesn't matter where you face it. It does a little bit, as in a person behind the player will have trouble have less ability to hear him than a person in front of him because it projects forward, and that's still the basic. The best, something I can say for saxes is not to go down to your reed. And this is really for any instrument. Don't bring yourself down to the instrument, bring the instrument up to you. Your instrument is easier to move than you are. And I mean, especially for a tuba, a trombone, a baritone, those are heavy instruments and those are a lot harder to move than, say, a trumpet. A trumpet is fairly easy to move, and it has a good range of anything. But as far as actual tuning notes, it does have some problems. Like that's why these have things like this. These are designed for when notes are characteristically flat or sharp. And these usually are higher notes, like the first valve and second valve. If you're playing up high, will make it sharp. So what you would do is kick the third valve tuning slide. Mine is inadequate as far as it doesn't work terribly well. Or if you're playing low with a first valve key, you'll kick the rear tuning slide out, which is even less adequate. But you don't really use these, especially not this one. Use this one a little bit, like in lower register notes. That's a very bad example, but when it's down there, if you listen, you can hear that it's a little sharp. By kicking it out, you you bring the tone down a little bit. Now you can always do that with your embouchure. Just for a trumpet in general, you're used to playing a lot higher than the lowest note that you can, which is a C sharp for a trumpet. Of course, it's different than other instruments because that's not the normal key, and C sharp is just 1, 2, 3. Well, I guess it's also D flat is what it's also, but it can also be known as D flat, but that doesn't really matter. For slurs, the best way to tongue is always with your tongue. You always want to separate your notes with your tongue because it's the quickest part. You always want this set up for trumpets. It's always against your front teeth. And I'm not sure about other instruments, but I suspect it's fairly similar. You never want to try to tongue without your tongue, like separate with your air. You'd see, the only time you would really do that, like that's a very strange tenuto. And that was actually me more separating with my lips than actually with my air, because I'm so conditioned that I don't like to cut off my air by that. I cut it off with my tongue or by just taking the instrument away from my face. And yeah, so that's the best. Those are some of my best tips for playing an instrument. Of course, there are always differences, especially for instruments that don't use air, such as string instruments and percussion. Those are different, mainly because by striking the tone harder, you make a louder sound. So and it's different for that, but of course, I'm not going to go into that because I don't have any good knowledge on that. But yeah, tuning slides are your friend at most points. I mean, for trombones, for example, their slide, they can alter that. You can, if you have a good enough ear, you can listen and you can tell. You can change your tune by changing the slide position to make yourself in tune with other people in your section, and that is the key. You're not tuning to yourself. You're trying to change your tune to others if you're sight reading and you haven't tuned. And of course, for trumpets and brass in general, tuning really only gets the instrument to where you are when you play it. So I can play it with my upper lip all the way up. And I could get tuned for that, but when I actually play a reel with my lower lip down, it can be completely different. And just how you set the instrument up on your face controls really how you do it. It's hard, to say the least, to tune an instrument, especially brass and most especially trumpets. But yeah, some helpful things that I might do to get better at certain things, like if you want to get better at endurance, like being able to play longer, take in as much air as you can and play for as long as you can connectedly, without separating, without going for air, without fading out. That's the key. You don't want to fade out. You don't want to lose volume towards the end. You want to stay on the same plane unless you are trying to decrescendo. Ways to get better at jumping octaves. I forgot the phrase earlier, but the ways to get better at jumping octaves, just by actually trying it without moving your fingers or really anything at all. And you can do this with almost every fingering. I would not recommend it with this fingering though, because this is not used on anything by itself. It is used either in tandem with this, in tandem with that, in tandem with that, or in tandem with this. It's never used by itself because it is obnoxiously flat. It can be used as an alternate fingering, but this would only be in a time when your third valve tuning slide would have been damaged, being dented or misshapen in a way that it's constantly sharp instead of correct. But yeah, the best way to do that, to do articulation jumps, is to change your articulation, and the best way to do that is by not tonguing up to it. Like, you can do it like this. Which is the easy way to do it. The best way to actually get better at doing it consistently and doing it smoothly, doing it easily, but doing it well, it's just to play it while playing. It's just to slur up, and that's sometimes the best way to get better at anything, is just to take it simple and connect everything before you start adding in separations. And of course, that's the default stand for anything with almost any piece. When you get a first time sight reading it, everything will be, or a lot of things will be connected, unless they're a professional or an experienced player. But back to what I was saying, the best way to learn how to octave jump is to not use your tongue to do it though. It's very messy, but if you can do it slurred, you can do it tongued, and that's the best way to do it. And it's usually, you're never going to have a jump from a, usually you're not going to have it like that. You're going to more have it something like, something like that. That's mostly made up, and if it sounds wrong, that's because it is wrong. You're most likely going to jump octaves, but to different notes, and that's where you can screw up. The way that I warm up is by doing something like this, because you can, this is one of my first warm-ups. octave jump without tonguing. Then I do it again tonguing, but tonguing intermittently, making it 16ths, eighths, triplets, such and such to warm up my tongue. And that's the best way that I find to warm up. But of course, you're never going to warm up like that in a real classroom. You're going to warm up on a scale, which is something, these are all written in trumpet, but these are, I'll probably take a picture and show it to you, but these are what you would most likely play. And the way that they do it is that these are the keys, same key as what you would be playing on a song. For some of these scales, you only do one octave, like the B flat scale, which is just, that's the tuning note scale. That's the no sharps, no flats scale. That's the easy scale, and that's the scale that you might become most common with. The F scale, which is a little bit different, it goes. That goes up 2 octaves, while the B flat scale that only goes up 1. And of course, for some instruments, I mean, for trumpet and for any instrument, sometimes you might get to a scale that you can't do 2 octaves because a trumpet's range is limited. And this, I know for certain that there are some times when you do this, and what you would do in that case is you just run through the entire scale again. And when you go back down, what you do is you go up to the top, jump back to the bottom, go up to the top again. Then when you start going back down, go back down once, then go back up to the top and go back down again. That's how you would do it when we warm up, if they warm up on a scale that you don't have both things. And if you're not sure, and the fingerings will change for notes, like E changes from 1, 2 to just 1 later. And that's just because articulation changes, and it's different for trumpet, and it'll probably be something different for a different instrument. But yeah, you'll learn on scales, and you'll probably do the scale that corresponds with the piece. And that's how music is written, is the scales are what are the scales are the palette that the artist uses to paint the piece. The piece is 8 or so different colors, 7 or 8 different colors. But yeah, that's the basics of how to play well with an instrument. If you have any questions, put it in the comments. I might get to it. I probably won't, especially if this is a few years later, since you'll probably be watching this in the future, if at all. And if you need it answered and I don't get back to you, talk to your teacher. And he or she, whoever it is probably the best person to go to. And if they're not available, talk to a higher level or a upperclassman section mate, or a person that's older, that's already been through the thing once before, especially if you're in symphonic band. But yeah, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to comment. I might not get back to you. And if you do have any real urgent questions, definitely talk to your band director. And see ya.